And then here at the top, we're going to welcome a guest. We got Matt Gillaspie here from Piper Sandler. He's here to talk to us about tax levies and bond referendums and all that kind of fun stuff. And thanks for moving your travel from last week to this week. And
no problem. Are you ready for that discussion?
We are ready.
Okay. Well, good evening. As the board president said, my name is Matt Gillaspie from Piper Sandler in Des Moines. I think I've met most of you here a couple months ago when I was here for this sort of similar discussion. So this packet has a lot of what we talked about before at that particular meeting. There's some extra information in here too. We can go over anything that you see in this packet. I'm going to kind of skip around in it to some things that I think maybe are more relevant to your immediate concerns. But that doesn't mean we can't go backwards and go to a different page or go somewhere else to something that you guys specifically want to talk about. I'm going to begin on page 3. And this is just kind of a big overview of what funding capacity the school district might have if there was some kind of infrastructure project. We're going to talk a little bit later about a maybe more specific project, but this is just sort of vague, big picture stuff. You know, what's the most you could possibly do? That's not to say that that's what the board is doing. This is really just for board education, for community education as well. But there are basically 3 sources from which the school district can generate funds to build buildings, renovate buildings, build bus barns, build athletic fields, whatever it might be, infrastructure improvements that the district would use. And that would be sales tax revenue bonds, borrowing against a voted PPEL, and or having a general obligation bond referendum or a bond issuance. So that's what you see on this page. And I'm going to go through some of these things pretty quickly, again, just for the sake of time, but pull me back and ask questions. I can talk for hours. Some of you know that. Some of you don't want that to happen, but certainly I can talk as much as you want. But sales tax revenue bonds, the school board has the authority to borrow against the future collection of the sales tax. Many districts, I would actually say probably most districts around the state, have done that at one point or another, or currently have some kind of debt outstanding from the sales tax. You can borrow all the way technically through 2050, but what you see on this page under number 2 would be just a 20-year amortization or a 20-year repayment. And the reason for the 20-year is literally just something that I picked. I don't believe, unless there's a real significant need, that a school district should be borrowing longer than 20 years. And the only reason that I have that opinion is because that's what state law dictates for general obligation bonds. They cannot extend beyond 20 years. And if you borrow, no matter what source, if you're borrowing beyond 20 years, the 20 years itself, as you all know that have had a mortgage, for example, a home mortgage, the amount of interest that begins to accrue is significant. So if you're going out to 22 to 25 to almost 30 years, it just compounds even more. But if you have a project that needs more than what I'm talking about tonight, it is an option. We could borrow with a longer term, so I can always calculate that. But what you see on that page is that the school district might be able to generate, with a borrowing that could happen actually as early as this summer, a little bit over $14 million. So that would be no property tax implication because it's just borrowing against the future collection of the sales tax. It would not require an election because you already have implemented your revenue purpose statement. The district voted and approved that a few years ago. But you would have to have a public hearing. And that public hearing comes with a 14-day window during which you can get citizen response to the plan. And if there's enough citizens that do not want that particular thing to happen, whether that's renovating a school, building a bus garage or whatever it might be, if there's enough people that don't want that to happen, they can petition and stop the board from doing it. And if that were to happen, and it has happened a few times around the state in the last 5 years, the school board could still proceed, but you'd have to have an election. That type of election, not a property tax general obligation bond election, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but if you get petitioned for sales tax, you still can proceed, but then you have to have an election to get approval from the citizens to borrow from sales tax for that particular reason. And that type of election can only happen in November, just like the general obligation bond. That changed last legislative session, so beginning July 1 of last year, that became the new law. So the timing for many of these things is it always has been sensitive. You always needed to plan these things out, sometimes years in advance, but it's even more so today because you only have that one opportunity a year to have that type of election just in case you were petitioned. So if it ever becomes the desire or plan for the school board to borrow against the sales tax, you'll want to have that hearing as soon as you possibly can, so that you have enough time in case you were to be petitioned to still go through the legal process of getting a resolution, calling for the election, filing that with the county auditor, et cetera. And you need to do that all basically no later than the middle of September in order to get something onto a November ballot. So other than that, if you don't get petitioned, then the school district, the school board has the authority to borrow X amount, whatever that amount might be, and you can do it immediately, you could do it a few months later, you could do it a year or 2 years later. It does not have to be money that's immediately gone out and borrowed then. And if you are going to combine two sources, which is very common, many schools will have a voted general obligation bond, but that amount doesn't generate enough for whatever the project is that they're wanting. So they might also borrow from sales tax. And if that's the case, you especially want to have that hearing soon enough to know you are or not going to be petitioned for the sales tax part of it. Because if you get petitioned and the school board decides we're not going to go ahead, well, then there's no reason to continue on with the GO bond part of it as well. So you want to have those things kind of out of the way.
Now, why does that not include an actual vote, the sales tax?
That's just the way the law was written. It used to not even require a hearing up until July of 2019. That's when the legislature extended the tax. So it was the sales tax was going to expire December of 2029. In the summer of 2019, the legislature changed the law and they extended the sales tax out through December 31 or January 1 of 2051. So that's a good thing. But at the same time, then they also imposed some other rules. And one of those rules is that now there has to be this public hearing.
So who ultimately makes a decision on whether or not to go that route then?
Well, first, the school board would make the decision first to go down that path and have the hearing. Let's just hypothetically say you were trying to get $14 million. So this school board would discuss the projects, the merits of the project. Oh, yep, we want to do that. That sounds like what we want to do. So let's call for the hearing. So let's just say at your February meeting, you might schedule a public hearing. That hearing would happen probably at your March meeting, and in between you'd have to publish notice in the newspaper and all of that stuff. At that March meeting, then you'd have a public hearing. You'd describe, not in significant detail because it's too early to know all of the significant details, but you would, say, hey, we're thinking about borrowing $14 million from sales tax, and we're going to build some classrooms onto the school building or build a bus garage or whatever. And as long as nobody then petitions you in that 14-day window that begins after that day of the hearing, then the school board can proceed. So initially it's the school board's choice, and it ultimately becomes the community's choice by them not petitioning you. It basically is their blessing to say, go ahead. And if they do petition you, then still the school board has another option to then call for that special election, to ask permission, not just from the few people that might have signed a petition, but from the greater community. Does that make sense?
What is required in terms of being a citizen petition? How many?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's 100 people or 30% of the number that voted in the most recent school board election. Whichever of those two numbers is the biggest number. So it's at least 100, and of course in your district's big enough, it would be more than 100. But even the smallest districts in Iowa would require 100 people at least to sign that petition. That vote, if you did have to go to that route to have the vote, that vote takes 50% approval, not 60% like the general obligation bond. It's not impacting people's property taxes, so the likelihood that you get petitioned is much less, but it certainly is. That option is there. We've had, I don't know the exact number, but I'm going to guess 5 schools since 2019 that have been petitioned, and a few of those districts have taken that question to a ballot. So that's the sales tax. And again, we can keep coming back to these questions anytime you guys have them. Item number 3 on that page is showing you the PPEL. That's the physical plant and equipment levy. So once a PPEL levy is in place, the school board has the authority to borrow against the future collection of it. The school board, your board, and pretty much every board in the state levies what's called the board PPEL. That's only 33-cent tax levy. You cannot borrow against that. That's just cash every year, just money coming in, and you're generally using that to buy school buses or lease school buses, fix the carpet, roof, tuck pointing, just kind of generic updates that need to be done all the time to keep your campus in physically running order. It's the voted PPEL, which you currently have a 67-cent voted PPEL. It can be up to $1.34, and that's something that you're going to be probably putting on a ballot soon to try to ask voters for that. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But either way, you have 67 cents now, only for one more year, and it will drop off unless you put something in its place, whether that be 67 cents like you have, $1.34, which is the maximum. It could be anything between a penny and $1.34. But pretty much most schools in the state have 67 cents or $1.34. What you see then in the section right below the bullet points in item number 3, if you renewed the 67 cents right now in March, that would be the next available election, which I do believe you're probably going to be putting something on that ballot. If it was renewed at only 67 cents, which is what you have now, and then the school board chose to borrow against the future collection, you could generate around $5.5 million. So that would be sort of not a property tax impact. Of course, the PPEL is property taxes, so it's not nothing, of course, but it is something that the community, the property owners are already paying. So it wouldn't be an additional tax. That's not something that they haven't already been paying for many, many years. If you went to $1.34, which I believe is the plan to ask for, of course, double the levy generates roughly double the amount of money. So you could generate probably close to $11 million. Now, all of these numbers in this entire packet and throughout the whole night, when I'm talking about these numbers, they're all subject to change because they're based off of guesses that I made about interest rates, property values, enrollment, all of those things. So they could change. They shouldn't change dramatically, but I don't have a crystal ball either. But somewhere around $11 million. So that would be basically a 67-cent increase from what you already have. And if you want to talk about the impact of that 67 cents right now, we can, or if there's another page where I was going to do that, but you can tell me what you guys want to do. And then item number 4, that's the general obligation bond. So that's what most people think of when you hear about a bond issue, a bond referendum, floating a bond, any of those terms. That's the big one that most people think of. And that's the 20-year property tax-backed general obligation bond that requires 60% approval. Now, that election can only happen now in November. So it used to be that there were 5 days out of every 2-year cycle that you could have that type of an election. Now you can only have it one time a year in November. So again, it's very important that you plan for that, because if you miss the date or if you do have the vote and it fails, you have to wait at least an entire year before you can contemplate doing it again, whereas you used to be able to bring it back as long as you'd waited 6 months. Now, there are 2 levy limits here as well, $2.70, and these levy limits that I'm talking about are per $1,000 of taxable value. On another page, we will talk about what that impact is to people. But $2.70 is what every school in the state has the authority to issue general obligation bonds up to that levy by asking one ballot question. That ballot question is going to say the amount. So in this example, you see it's about 36 million. That's the maximum. I'm not suggesting you're going to go to 36 million. We're talking about maximum here. But you could put an amount on a ballot and it would say 36 million, 37 million, something like that. And it would describe the project. Now, it's not going to describe the project in great detail because it's a very short paragraph that goes onto the ballot, but it's going to say that you're building classrooms at the elementary, or it's going to say you're doing an HVAC system, or you're improving athletic facilities. It's going to give the voter a fair idea of what it is you're doing, but it's also not going to give significant detail because you don't know the significant detail yet. So you don't know if it's going to be 6 classrooms that you add. Maybe the bond amount, the proceeds will only allow you to build 5 because the cost of steel goes up. But maybe the cost of steel goes down, so maybe you can build 7. So you're not going to specify that type of thing on a ballot because it ties your hands. But you are going to say that it's work at the elementary, it's work at the high school, it's work at athletic fields or something like that, so that the voter isn't just left in the dark. Now, if that's not enough to build whatever it is that you're wanting, that $2.70, you can go to a higher tax levy, but to exceed the $2.70 levy that every school can go to with that one ballot question, you could go up to $4.05 or anywhere in between $2.70 and $4.05. But to do that, you have to have a second question that people vote for. That question also requires 60% approval. That question is generally going to be saying, hey, can we tax you at a higher rate? So it's going to specify $4.05 or $3.80 or whatever it is you choose to put on the ballot, but it can't be more than $4.05. Again, that question requires 60% approval. Now, something that's changed with these election dates that's kind of odd is that second question, if a school district needs it, and again, I'm not suggesting you do or will, this is all just education tonight, but if a school needs to ask that second question for the higher tax levy authority, you can't ask that question at a November election in an even year. Very weird, but that's the way it goes. So you can ask it in March, and you have until this Friday to put something on the March ballot. That would include PPEL, any other kind of question. This Friday it must be to the county auditor by noon, or else the election is not going to occur. So you could have that question this March, or you could have the question in September, but you could not have the question in November, even though November is when you would be asking for the $20 million or $30 million or $50 million bond or whatever it might be. Or you could ask it next March. So it's very confusing. This is not your fault. This is not unique to Fairfield. This is what the legislature has done because they weren't very clear with the wording. So the attorneys are interpreting it their way. And that means that you can only have that question in March or September or November of an odd year. So let's just hypothetically say that this district is going to have that kind of a question. And you are going to vote a bond this November. Great. You can ask the bond question this November, 60% approval. But if you needed the higher levy, you would have to be having that question, I assume not in March, because that, again, you need to get that done by Friday. But I would assume you would either have that question this September or next March. If you have it next March, because maybe you want to wait and see if the bond question itself passes, that makes sense. I get that. But it means that your architect is also completely delayed. They're put on hold. Just because the bond is approved in November does not mean they can move forward and start doing their technical drawings and calculations, because they don't know until March that the voters are going to approve the higher levy. If the voters don't approve the higher levy, it doesn't matter that they approve the bonds, because the bonds aren't going to get issued. So therefore, in my opinion, you would probably have the election in September, but that's also confusing because you're going to have you would potentially have an election for a higher tax levy authority, but yet there's no bond related to it. So people in the community are going to be confused. And again, it's not unique to Fairfield. This is the way the legislature has done this. So just keep that in mind. Now, if you're not ready to do any of that, and you're going to have an election in November of 2025, then that's an odd numbered year. So you could have the two questions again on the ballot like you used to be able to. But just keep that in mind, that is kind of an oddity. We are discussing that with some legislators that are friendly enough to us to talk and listen. We believe that it was an oversight. I don't think it was really intentional that they did that. I think it was just they were in a hurry to get some laws changed, and they didn't think about the consequences of that. So it might get changed this session. Hopefully it does. So therefore, it wouldn't impact anybody, after May or June. But unless it changes, this is the way the law works right now.
Are both the questions 60%?
Yes, both of those questions, anything that's related to a general obligation, which is property tax back, is going to require the 60%. Now, you could add these three things together. Let's say you have a project that's big enough that one of these things isn't enough. So theoretically, and again, I don't think you're going to do this. This is all just hypothetical. You could get $54 million from the 405 bond. You could get basically $11 million from the PPEL. So there you're at $65 million. And you could get $14 million from the sales tax bond. So you could get close to $80 million really with one property tax question. I mean, the PPEL is also a question about property taxes, but not quite as significant as the bond. But if you look in the very top right-hand corner in that little red box, it's hard to see it on the screen for you guys, but that little box up there, that's discussing the constitutional debt limit, excuse me. So even though mathematically there are limits, levy limits within these three categories, the district and every municipality, not just schools, but cities and counties and schools and community colleges, are all limited. You cannot have more than 5% of your current assessed property value outstanding as a principal amount that you owe. So the interest doesn't count, but that number today is right about 82 million. And I put a range on there of 82 to 85 million simply because you're not doing something today. You may be doing something maybe next spring, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, who knows, or never. So, in the next couple of years, it's 82 to 85 million. So even though these things, and actually kind of coincidentally, yours add up to about 80 million, but some schools, just because of the makeup of their property values, amount of debt that they already have, et cetera, they could go much higher than this if you added these three things together. But it doesn't matter if voters and the community supported everything you do and they said, yes, let's do all three of them. We'll vote yes and we'll pay taxes till the cows come home. They could say that and it doesn't matter. You cannot exceed the number that's in that red box, basically. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And that number went up, but that's because all of us got those nice
That's
letters
exactly
that our
right.
assessments went up this year.
Yep, that's a good point. So you all, I included, we all got these letters about a little bit less than a year ago in the mail that said, oh my gosh, your property's worth a lot more money, right? Your house, your farm, not as much for commercial, but for sure residential and ag property that happened. My house personally went up 29%. But my taxes, your taxes are not going to go up 29% or 20% or whatever yours might have been because of the rollback, which we'll see on a different worksheet. But the increase in the assessed value, the only thing that did, although it's a good thing, although it's a bad thing depending on your perspective, is that it increased the municipality's capacity for legal borrowing. So if every property in my district, I live in Urbandale, mine was 29, but my neighbor might have been 22. It's different all the time. But if everything went up 29%, that means that the school district and the city and the county, all of a sudden, they can borrow 29% more than they could the prior year. But they still have to go through these levy limits and voting requirements, et cetera. It's not just a blank check, but it does increase that limit. For you guys, it probably doesn't really make a big difference because, not saying that you could never go to the limit because you could, but I don't think you would. This community just would not do that. But there are communities that do it. Bondurant Farrar is a good example. They're a metro district. They are growing immensely. They need to keep building and adding on to their buildings, but they were stuck. The voters would approve bonds, and the voters did approve bonds. But the bond amount was bigger than the number in that box for them. So they had the authority to issue the bonds, but they had to wait year after year after year until they could actually get the legal capacity. Well, all of a sudden, their property value went up just like yours did, solved that problem. So now this spring and summer, they will go out and issue all the rest of the debt that they needed to issue to do the projects that were kind of in the immediate wheelhouse that they had. So any questions about what you see on that page?
I just have two process questions.
Yep.
On the voted PPEL, if we go for the $1.34 and that fails, then what happened to our $1.60?
Nothing.
We have that for another year? Or?
Yeah, so you have 67 cents right now. It's been in place for 9 years. This is the 9th year. It still is in place through fiscal year 25, which is the budget you are imminently working on here. So you're going to levy the 67 cents, I presume, no matter what. If you vote $1.34 and it does pass, it doesn't take effect until the next fiscal year anyway. But if you vote the $1.34 and it fails, you don't lose the 67 cents, but you only have it for another year anyway.
So we'd have to do.
So most likely what you would do, I assume, is that in September, that's the next election, that you'd come back and then ask maybe for 67 cents, if that's the feedback that you got from the community. Or you could ask the $1.34 again and maybe try to educate better and get people to understand why you think you needed it. But yeah, you wouldn't lose anything, but you don't gain anything.
Got it. And we have to take action again sooner.
Yep, the process would start all over again.
Okay, then just one more quick question. If we were going for a $4.05, whatever, that second question
Yep.
in September, does that also include like a description of the project
No.
at that point? It's
No, that's the
just a
weird thing, is
question.
that question just talks about the tax levying authority.
Okay.
So of course, you're not going to just put that question on a ballot and just turn it out to the citizens, because the citizens aren't going to know what you're doing. So you will have to be prepared, if that's what you do, and already be talking about the bond, the project, the size of the project, et cetera, even though maybe normally you might not have begun that discussion until September, October, leading up to the November election. You're going to need to do that earlier so that people know why in the hell are they voting for a higher tax levy when there's not even a bond associated with it. But yeah, the question itself does not describe the project in that situation.
Got it.
Again, I'm going to skip some pages, but definitely ask me to come back if you want. I'm going to go to page 7, and this is showing you the current calculation for that constitutional debt limit. So what you see at the top there, that's the new assessed value. So that's the January 2023 assessed value. We're always a year behind. So that's the number that we just learned what it was just in the last week and a half. So that's $1,725,000,000. That's the assessed value of all the taxable property within the school district. It's not the market value of the property. Now, the auditor or the assessor will tell you that the commercial property and the residential property is assessed close to the market value, and it's supposed to be by law. The law dictates that they should be assessing that property between 95% and 105% of what the market value is. That's why all of our values went up so much, is because the county assessors, not just Jefferson, all across the state, the county assessors weren't doing that. They were undervaluing all of this property, so they had to catch up. The state dictated that they had to do that, so they brought all those values up. So that 1.7 billion, 5% of that, 86.2 million. So that's the constitutional debt limit of the district. You do have a little bit of debt still outstanding, sales tax bonds that you issued before. So we have to subtract that off. So that means that if you went out right now, actually not until July 1, this number is accurate beginning July 1, but between July 1 of 24 and June 30th of 25, you could legally, I'm not saying you would do it or that these folks would support it, but you could legally issue $82 million in debt. But you couldn't issue 90 million. You couldn't issue 300 million. 82 million is it. Now the city, same kind of concept for the city, which we're not here to talk about the city, but just obviously the city's value is less. School district is a much bigger area than the city. So 1.7 billion includes the city, but it also includes Libertyville and all the farmland in between, et cetera, et cetera. And then the county, similarly, it's actually, your county is probably not even that big because you're in so many counties. You're actually taking in some of the other 4 counties around you.
Of that 1.7 billion, do you have a breakdown of what's agriculture, what's commercial, and what's residential?
I sure do. Let's go to the next page. That is on the next page 8.
Can I also jump in real quick with a question? Can you speak to our history as a district in paying off?
Yep, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
That's one of the other pages I've highlighted to come to,
Perfect.
but not quite yet. So page 8, which is what you see up here, and I'm sorry you can't see it very well, but I'll try to tell you what that says. The very top little box up there, that's the new assessed values, and it's breaking it down by residential, ag land, ag buildings, commercial, industrial, railroad, utilities, and then gas and electric. And then it subtracts off exemptions. Exemptions would be homestead credits and military exemptions, family farm exemptions, those types of exemptions. And then the second major box that goes across, that's then the taxable value, which is really all that we care about. Yes, we care about the assessed value for the constitutional debt limit, but it has nothing to do with anything else. But for tax purposes, calculating tax levies, we want to know about the taxable value. So that's where you see that. And then in the very bottom right, you can kind of see a red square-ish, ovalish thing. That's just circling the taxable breakdown. So what this is telling us is that in fiscal year 25, that begins July 1 this summer, 48.39% of your property taxes are coming from residential property, which includes houses that are outside of city limits. So it includes the farmhouses, the acreages, whatever, anything that's a residential property. And 20.9% of your property taxes are coming from ag land and ag buildings. So the buildings would not be the house, but that would be the barn, the chicken coop, the hog lot, whatever it might be. Those buildings are taxed as though they're ag land as well. So 48% residential property, basically 21% is coming from ag land, about 14.5% is coming from commercial and industrial, and then 16% is coming from other things, which is generally railroad and utilities. So, does that answer your question that you were looking for? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything important. It just depends. But for different parts of your community that might perceive that they're paying lots and lots of taxes, or at least more than everybody else, this answers that question, at least for this fiscal year. Do the residential people pay more? Yes, they do. Not on a dollar for dollar basis, but they do pay a bigger percentage. Do the ag people pay more than the commercial? Yes, they do. They're paying 21%, commercial's paying about 14.5%. Now we're gonna get to another worksheet in a little bit that makes it even more minute, which is really probably what a lot of people are interested in. What's it cost you? Not just all of these people, but what does it cost you? Since you own a house, you own a business, you own a farm. And we'll get to that in a second. So to answer your question, Stephanie, if you go to page 10, so the top of this page, which has that great big star next to it, that's just showing you about almost 15 years of property tax levy breakdown for Fairfield School District. So it's breaking it down. The far column, well, the very far column showing you the fiscal year starts in 210 and goes up to this year, fiscal year 24. And then the next column is the general fund, which is the main fund. That's what the school is taxing. Most of the money is going to that fund for salaries, benefits, etc. Then there's the management fund. That is paying for insurance costs, some insurance costs, early retirement, if that is an option, etc. And then there's the voted PPEL. There's the board PPEL. And then the other column that has our copies are yellow, but that copy's kind of, I'm colorblind. It looks like greenish to me. I don't know what that color is. But that column is the bond. So the general obligation bond. At the very beginning, back in fiscal year 10, 11, 12, 13, it was zero because you didn't have a general obligation bond. Then you voted that bond. Actually, you voted it before that, but it failed a couple times. But it finally passed back in 2013. Those bonds were issued. These were for renovations at the high school mostly. And that's when this tax levy came on. So you began levying in that first year 95 cents in property taxes to pay the bond. And then you were up to the levy limit, basically close to that $2.70. It dropped down a little bit, went back up. And what was happening, the school district was levying extra funds in the debt service levy to pay the debt off faster. But while you were doing that, or while the prior school board was doing that, you see in the gray shaded area right next to the star, the overall tax levy of the school, which is really what most people are concerned with. Sure, you can be concerned about the PPEL levy and the bond levy and the general fund, but you really are mostly concerned about the total levy. That's what's costing you money. The school district's total tax levy was actually dropping from as high as $15.46 down to around, well, today, $10.58, but through the life of the bond, down to about $11.80. So even though the school board was levying extra money in the debt service fund, the tax levy as a whole was dropping. And meanwhile, the school board was using the extra money, which is the only thing they could have done with it. They were using it to pay off those general obligation bonds that were issued, property tax backed, to fund the improvements at the high school. And that's described in the big box at the bottom. But what that big box says is that through the actions of the school board, through those years while that was happening, the school board paid off a 20-year property tax-backed general obligation bond in 11 years. Only one other district that I know of in the entire state has done that, which is Johnston. You did the same thing at the same time. Paid off a 20-year bond in only 11 years. And at this district, you saved $1.5 million for your property owners. You actually saved $1,550,615. So it's a precise number, we know. That's $1.5 million that never had to be levied against property taxes. So, and Johnston saved almost 9 million, but of course they're a much bigger district. But the same process went through both districts. So what that, again, that shaded area at the bottom is talking about, and I don't include this, and I'm not here tonight to say this to make anybody feel good about yourself or you guys to feel good about them or whatever. But the fact is, the school board and the administration through those years was being excellent fiduciaries of the taxpayers' money. You saved taxpayers $1.5 million by doing something that actually ultimately resulted in their property tax levy lowering and still paying the debt off faster. There are about 50 school districts that are doing this right now, but none to the degree that you did. Ames is now beginning to pick that pace up, so they will probably match what you and Johnston did, is my guess. Other districts are doing it to a lesser degree, an important degree, but to a lesser degree.
Do you have a comparison of what a lot of other districts are paying for their actual total levy rate?
Yeah, that's on the next page, actually. So if you go to the next page, 11, what you see here, actually, there's a comparison on the top left box. That's county. Then the city is in the middle, and the school district is down at the bottom. And then there's the total consolidated levy, which would be all of the taxing authorities combined. So that would be not just the city, county, and school, but also the community college, the ag extension, the township cemetery, all of that stuff all together. So you could pick any one of those and look. And what you see is that Fairfield / Jefferson County folks are right in the middle. For good or bad, I'm not here to say what you guys do is good or bad. That's for you to decide. But the fact is, you're right in the middle. Now, and the counties, we're looking at population. So we're looking at the 5 bigger counties and the 5 smaller counties. But basically, together, it's 11 counties that are closest to the same size. So just a little bit bigger than you is Clay County. Just a little bit smaller than you in population is Floyd County. And you can see that the average of those 11 counties is $6.18. And here in Jefferson County, people are paying $7. But they're paying more in Hardin County, for example, and et cetera. You can see in the city example, Grinnell is just above you in size, Mount Pleasant just below you in physical size population-wise, and you're levying $16.90. Perry School District, Webster City, Perry has an almost $18 levy. Webster City has close to a $20 levy. Denison, a $19 levy. Keokuk, $23 levy almost. And then, of course, you do see those lower, this is the city we're talking about. Pleasant Hill, $11, Sioux Center, $11, etc. However, you can see on the right side of the page, there's some written verbiage. So when we look at any municipality, whether we're looking at the school or the city or the county or the community college, and we try to compare what you're doing here to what your neighbor's doing, you really cannot do that, because you don't know what's going into their budget. Certainly you can dive into their budget if you want to, but most citizens are not going to do that, and they're not going to even understand how to do that. But when one school district, for example, has a higher tax levy and one school has a low tax levy, for example, the bottom section is schools, you have a $10.58 school levy. The average of these 11 districts is $13.35. The highest levy there is Vinton-Shellsburg at $15.50, Solon, $16.28. So they have almost a $6, not quite twice what you have, but they have a significantly higher levy rate than you do. Your levy rate is the lowest of the 11 schools that are right in the same population as your district. Now, just because you're the lowest, though, that doesn't mean that you're the best. It doesn't mean the school board's doing a good job or a bad job. It doesn't mean that other schools wish they could be you or that you wish you could be Vinton-Shellsburg, because there are so many things that go into this. It's not just as simple as how much money do we need? That's what the tax levy is. Because some school districts levy parts of their revenue come from income surtax. That's a voted thing, so you have to get voter approval for it. But if you're doing that, The income surtax is replacing property tax, so that particular school's levy property tax is going to be lowered because people are paying a different tax, income surtax. Some schools have a bond, some schools don't. Some schools have a bond because they have a brand new building, so they have very modern new stuff, so they're paying for that. Other schools that maybe don't have any debt service levy, they maybe haven't improved their facilities for 100 years. Again, I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying those are differences that you'll see. So there are legitimate reasons why someone might have a very high levy and someone has a low levy. Even the school that has the bond, both Boone School District and Marshalltown School District years ago, they voted the $4.05 bond question. This has literally been almost 20 years ago. Their voters passed the bond amount and the tax levy question. But part of the politics, in order to get the people to vote and support it, was that their school board said, we will use sales tax to abate the levy, to replace the levy. So instead of levying property taxes for $4.05, they levied no property taxes, but they used all of their sales tax to make the bond payment. That sounds great from a property owner's point of view. That's $4.05 that those people did not have to pay. Yes, but that also means they had no sales tax left over. They were using so much of the sales tax money to make that payment that when the roofs literally at Boone, when the roofs started leaking and caving in, they didn't have any money to fix them because that should have been the sales tax money and the PPEL money. But they had used all of that money to reduce property taxes. And again, I'm not saying that's good or bad, that's a local decision. But what I'm saying is that if Marshalltown was on this list, it would appear just visually artificially low. Their tax levy would be $4 higher, but it's not because they're using so much sales tax. So on this list, it would look like their tax levy is lower. Someone might look at Fairfield and not know anything about Fairfield. And they might presume, oh, well, geez, Fairfield, there's no way they don't have a bond outstanding. So how could they have that levy? Well, they might have a $14.58 tax levy, but the school board's using sales tax to buy it down to $10.58. That could be the case. So you don't know what is happening in other schools' budgets. There are other levies that they're pulling, levers that they're pulling, levies that they're levying that voters approved that maybe they didn't approve here or vice versa. So you can't just say, I just wish we had that low tax rate. Or, geez, why do they have such a high tax rate? You look at that and you might think, geez, what's Solon doing? Their school board sucks. They don't know what they're doing. That's not what it means. Different circumstances, different property values, different goals, different needs in the districts. So we cannot look at the neighbors and say, why can't we be like that? Instead, you look at yourself and you either say, we're happy where we are, whether it's the school, city, or county, doesn't matter. Or you say, hey, we would like our tax levy to be lower. That's a legitimate ask from people, but what are you going to give up? From the county standpoint, are you going to give up the county snowplows? Doubt it. I hope you don't. Needed them this week. Are you going to give up the county sheriffs? Are you going to give up the county jail? I doubt it. From the school standpoint, yeah, you could lower the levy, but what are you going to do? Are you going to make your classroom sizes 20 students? No, maybe you're going to make them 40 students. You could do that, and you could cut this levy, but is that what you should do? So there's all kinds of things that go into these equations. Some of them the school board has no control over because of the funding formula, how it just works with property values, et cetera. Some of them you do have control over. Some of them the voters have control over, bond levies, PPEL levies, et cetera. So does that make sense, what you see there? Yep. Okay, then, again, we can come back to any of these pages we're skipping over, but I want you to go to page 24. Actually, you don't have to go back to these pages, but just for you to know, there are some written things that are, and you saw these last time I was here, they start on page 16. I think there's 5 of these little worksheets like this that are kind of like a little story. I wrote those. They don't say what school they're about. They're just kind of like situations that a school might find themselves in, good situations and bad situations, and what did they do about it. 2 of those stories our Fairfield School District. And I'll just let you guys try to figure out which ones they are. Go to page 24, which is the page that you see up here. And really the only reason I want to show you this is that little table that's up there. This is just kind of a visual that I already kind of explained, the voting dates. So if you wanted to have a sales tax revenue purpose statement, you don't need to do that. You've already done it. But you can see that you can't have that election either in a November of an even year. The next item is the voter approved PPEL. So that's the 67 cents or $1.34 that may be coming up here soon. You can vote it in March, September, not this November, but then the next November you could. And then you see the GO bond question. That's the dollar amount. So that's the 10 million, the 20 million, the 50 million. That's the question, can we build this thing and spend this much money? That can only be asked in November, but it can be asked in every November. But then the levy to exceed the 270, you can see that could be March, September, and then the odd Novembers. And then instructional support, etc. And then the bottom part below that dark line, those are other things. But one of them is the sales tax bond approval. So if a school gets petitioned during that hearing process, that's what that very first item is in that second section. The sales tax revenue bond, bond issuance component. If you needed to have that election, that then could only be in the November dates. Any questions about that? Let's go to page 32. Page 32 is showing examples of what the district could do if you did extend your vote at PPEL. What could you do if the board chose to borrow against it? Now, just because you put a question on the ballot doesn't mean the board's going to borrow against it. You may not. It depends. And today you may think you never would, and that may be a legitimate, belief. But tomorrow a tornado comes through town and rips away the high school, and the insurance only pays so much. You might have to borrow from it. So having that authority and that capacity is a good thing to have. And I'm not saying that like making that up. When Applington Parkersburg, we all remember that. If most of us, I think most of you are old enough, hopefully, to remember that. It's only been about 12 years ago. When they built that new school building back, their insurance did not pay for all of it. It wasn't enough. Just coincidentally, they had just passed a general obligation bond that said they were going to borrow, I think it was $8 million, to build a new auditorium. So to know how specific the law is, something devastating happened. I was literally going to go to that school district the Monday, the next day. That happened on a Sunday. The next day, I was going to Applington Parkersburg to sell those bonds so they could build a new auditorium. Obviously, we had to put that on hold because the school isn't there anymore. But you would think, at least I think, a rational person might think, well, wait, the taxpayers said they could borrow $8 million. Why don't we just let them borrow $8 million because the school's gone and help build the building back? No. The ballot didn't say, oh, in case a tornado takes our school away, you can shift the money over to this thing. The ballot said it was for an auditorium, and that's all that money could be used for. So they did build an auditorium when they built the school back. They used the $8 million for that, but they had to borrow money to build the rest of the school back as well. They did borrow from PPEL. They did borrow from sales tax because they had the ability and the authority to do it. So what this is showing, the top box is just showing what if you renewed it at 67 cents. That's what you already have. So if you just renewed that at the same level you have now, and it's all property taxes because you can't borrow against income surtax. So if it's all property taxes and you had that levy in place again for a new 10-year period, depending on interest rates, you could generate around $5.5 million. So on that summary page that we looked at the very beginning, page 3, this is where those numbers are coming from that I had popped into those colored numbers. If you asked voters for the $1.34 and then you chose to borrow from it, you could generate around $11 million. Now that doesn't mean you would do it at all, but it also doesn't mean you need to borrow $11 million. Maybe you have something that you only need $4 million or you only need $7 million. Obviously you could do that. This is just showing you the maximum amount. Not to say that you would go there, that you would need to go there, that you'd want to go there, but you could. Now, you kind of think of it like if you went to that levy limit, whether it's 67 cents or $1.34, then the school board is kind of tapping the board out of the PPEL. Well, that's kind of true, but not really, because your property value almost certainly is going to grow. It doesn't grow every single year forever, but it does grow almost every year. There are a few years when it might drop, but generally over this 10-year period of time here, the property values are going to go up. So as the property value goes up, that 67 cents or the $1.34 levy is going to generate more money, but you only need a fixed amount to pay the bond. In this case, 1.3 million that you see in the bottom. So if you only need 1.3 million, but then all of a sudden you're generating 1.45 million because property values went up, you have an extra $50,000 or $100,000 that you can spend. That's spent on buses and technology and maintenance and all those things that I said before. Plus you would always have your board PPEL, and you would have surplus money from the sales tax, whatever's not committed to any kind of borrowing from that source as well. The next page shows maximum general obligation, but I'm going to skip that for right now because we're going to come to some specific scenarios. So I want to skip ahead and we'll come back to page 35. But first I want to go to page 38. This is a question that many of you here and probably out here as well would be asking. This worksheet, again, it's very hard to see it up there, but most of you have seen it before over the years. Actually, you've seen this worksheet for 20 years. Because I've been working with the district for 20 years and I've been using the same worksheet. It changes because the rollback changes, but the concept is always the same. This particular worksheet in the yellow box that's up there, or the shaded one, this is telling us what does a $2.70 property tax cost someone. Now this of course is talking about what if the school had a bond, but it doesn't have to be a bond. This could be $2.70 in management fund, cash reserve levy. It could be the city levying $2.70. It could be the county. It could be the community college. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. And this could be Fairfield. It could be Urbandale, where I live. It's all the same. If my school's levying $2.70 and your school's levying $2.70, the math is identical. Doesn't matter where you live. The only thing that's different between what I might pay and what you might pay is the value of our property. If I have a $200,000 house here in Fairfield, I could pick that house up, crane it out to Urbandale, and simply because it's in the metro area, having nothing to do with the quality or workmanship or condition of the house, the same house picked up and put in Urbandale is going to be valued higher, period. So you might have a $200,000 house here, that might be a $300,000 house in Urbandale. Same thing, but you're going to pay different taxes. It's the same $2.70 levy in both places, but because one house is worth more than the other, it works out to be different money. This is especially true of ag land, because you could have a $2.70 levy on ag land, and we'll get to that in just a second, so I'm going to skip ahead. But for example, in Lucas County, 1 acre of ag land, the average assessed value is only $647, whereas here in Jefferson County, it's $1,470, but in Grundy County, it's the highest this year in the state. It kind of goes back and forth between Grundy and Sioux generally, $2,364. Same $2.70 tax levy, but because the land is valued differently, just like the commercial property is valued differently, the residential property is valued differently, that agricultural landowner is going to pay different dollars, but again, their land is worth different amounts. So that's important to understand. So if you look at this worksheet, this is for specifically fiscal year 25. Now it doesn't usually change very much from one year to the next, but this year it did change a lot. Because we did see these very high growth in assessed values, the rollback percentage by state law had to be adjusted downward to offset that. So you see in that first section up there, this is the second big column on the left. Again, you guys can't see it very well, but the rollback beginning July 1 on that higher, 29% higher value of my own personal house, I'm going to pay taxes on 46% of that value. This current year, fiscal year 24, my house is worth 29% less, but I'm paying taxes on about 54% of the lower value. So next year I'm paying a lower percentage, but it's a much higher value. It's not exactly a wash, but it's really close. So most people really wouldn't see a significant difference in the real dollars that they're paying from last year to this year, because the rollback is mostly adjusting for that. And I say that in most parts of the state. An example that is not that would not be true would be in Tama County. Their county assessor had been keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. They had been assessing property close to that 95 to 105% in value. But basically, there's a couple other counties like that as well, but most of the counties weren't. They were undervaluing the property for years. That was happening. So they had to jack everybody's value up, 29% for me, but the assessed value of the property in Tama County, it didn't go up much because it was already at a fair value. But they still got this huge rollback. So the value of their property didn't change much, but now they're paying taxes only on 46% of it instead of 54% of it. Sounds like a great deal, which it is a great deal for the property owner, but it also means that the school district's taxable value declined by 3%. Their assessed value went up like 17%, but the amount that they actually tax on declined by 3%. That could have been potentially devastating. They just passed a general obligation bond issue at North Tama County Schools based off of an assumption that we made that property values would grow a little bit. We knew they don't grow a lot in Tama County. They're never growing by leaps and bounds, but we made a projection that they would grow a little bit. So all of the bond calculations were based off of that slightly higher number. Well, it didn't go up slightly higher. It actually went down. So with their $4.05, they have $4.05, their voters approved that in November, they can't borrow as much money as what the voters approved. Now in their case, it's not the end of the world because their project's gonna take 3 years, so they will just have to issue bonds in multiple series, and over those 3 years, their property value will grow, almost certainly, so they'll be able to do it. But it could have been a really, really bad scene there.
Now, what is the theory behind the rollback, or exactly why is that the way it is?
So the rollback is there, and I can't explain every part of it to you because I don't understand all of it, but the big picture is that the rollback was implemented back in the 70s, I believe, so that when there's large increases in the assessed value of one class of property but not the other classes, and it could happen to any class, the rollback is intended to keep it so that no one class of property outpaces any other class, the taxable value, by more than 3%. So let's say that ag value went up 6%, the assessed value, and residential value went up 7%. Well, the rollback would have to be adjusted so that that the residential value that really went up 1%, right? It would be adjusted. Actually, let me use a different example. This would be better. Let's say that ag went up 6% and residential went up 20%. So there's a huge difference. That's okay for the assessed value. Doesn't means you could sell your land for more, maybe, whatever. The rollback would have been adjusted so that the taxable valuation of the residential didn't grow by more than 9%. The 6% that the ag grew, and then there's the 3% variable. So it could grow by 6% plus an extra 3, but it can't grow by more than 9%. And the rollback percentage is making sure that happens. But it's important to note, it's making it happen on an average statewide calculation. That's why what happened in Tama County is the oddity. All of these things aren't true in Tama County, whereas they are true on an average discussion across the state. It's not necessarily true in Tama County.
So I do think on ag land, people oftentimes miscalculate how it's going to affect their taxes.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. We're going to talk about that in just a second. For sure. And it's not just ag people. Most people do, but it's more pronounced with ag property because commercial and residential property, as I said earlier, the assessed value and the market value, they're supposed to be within 95 to 105% of the real value. So it should, although it hasn't been, but now it is, they're pretty close. So what you think of in your mind is what you can sell your house for. It's pretty close to what that assessed value is. But ag value is not that at all. It's valued on a completely different formula, a productivity formula, and I can't explain the formula to you, but generally speaking, that ag value is assessed at roughly 10% of the market value. So if you're an agricultural landowner and you own ag land and you think, geez, you're pretty sure you could sell your land for $10,000 an acre because your neighbor just did that or your mom just sold her land for that, so you know it's worth $10,000 an acre, great, but you're not paying taxes on $10,000 an acre. It's a much lower number, which is what we're going to talk about. Whereas that $100,000 house, you are paying taxes, not on 100,000, but a much closer number to it. So the difference in people's perception is much, much more amplified. So let's look at the residential. That's the very top section. So then we'll use $100,000 just to make the math a little bit simpler. So if a school, and again, it could be the city, it could be the county, it could be the community college, but if a municipality in Iowa was going to increase any property tax by $2.70, somebody that owns a $100,000 home might think that they would take the 100,000s, we're always talking about $1,000 increments. 100,000s of that $100,000 property, 100 times the $2.70 increase is $270. Lots and lots of people think that is what it is. Now, it's not quite as big of a difference, so it's not as dramatic, but it still is pretty dramatic because look there, that $100,000 house is not paying taxes on $100,000. They're paying taxes on 46.3428% of it, plus that person, if it's the house that they live in, they get to take homestead credit. And what that little box at the very top, that's really impossible to read, that's just saying this year we are in a new world where if you're 65 years or older, you get not only the $4,850 that is listed here, but you get an additional $3,250 for fiscal year 25. And then in fiscal year 26, you get an additional $6,500 plus the $4,850. That's removed from the value of the home before the tax rate is applied. So if you are 65 years or older and we're looking at this discussion, and I ultimately get to the point, which I'm going to get to right now, to say that $100,000 home is not paying $270, they're paying $112 because of the rollback, because of the homestead credit. So the person that owns that home is paying $112, not $270, but if you're 65 years or older, it's even less than the $112. Not a lot less, but it's a little bit less because you get even more of a homestead credit. And there are other credits. Military credit. If you're a military veteran, thank you for being a military veteran. You get this little, almost worthless credit that the state throws at you. It should be way more than that for military veterans, but it's not, but it's something. That would be factored in, which I don't factor in because there's just too many variables. If you have a home that's on a farm, you might get family farm credit. That also would be reducing your tax liability more than what this worksheet shows. So this is almost worst case scenario. Your taxes, if you're 65 years or older, if you're a military veteran, if you're a family farm homeowner, the tax impact will be less than what it shows on this worksheet. But even going from $270 to $112, that's a huge difference. Now, maybe to some people, the $270 is no big deal. But to a lot of people, that is a lot of money. And they cannot afford that, or they think they can't afford it. But maybe $112 is more in line with what they think they can afford. They think, yeah, this improvement to the school or the city or the county, it's worth that to me. But if they had it in their brain that it was going to be $270, they've been misinformed, and of course they're going to go out and spread rumors. They don't even know they're spreading rumors, but they're going to talk about it. Oh, I'm going to pay $270. I can't tolerate that. Well, no, you're not paying $270. You're paying $112. I'm not saying $112 is nothing and that you should just swallow it and roll over and take it. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying $112 is a lot different than $270. When you go to the commercial property, that's the two middle sections, and this gets a little bit more complicated with commercial because we now give commercial property owners more of a tax break, which they should be getting. I think they should even get more personally. So if you own commercial property, so that could be the car dealership, the bank, the McDonald's, the barbershop, whatever. If you own commercial property that's assessed up to $150,000, you get to now take the more significant rollback that homesteads get, or that residential homes get. So that's the 46%. You're paying taxes on 46% of the first $150,000 of commercial value. Anything above $150,000 for commercial value still pays tax on 90% of the value. So if you have a property that's worth $200,000, You have to do the first calculation on the 150, second calculation on the 50,000, and then add them together. That's what those two sections are doing. But you can see commercial property owners, remember their property is supposed to be assessed at about the market value. They're paying taxes on 90% of that value. The residential property owners are only paying taxes on about 46%. Then we get to the ag land, which is the bottom of the top section. And there you see all the counties that you have property in, Van Buren, Wapello, Henry, Jefferson, and Washington, as well as Lucas and Grundy, the highest and lowest in the state. But we're going to talk about Jefferson because, of course, that's where most of your property is. So we then are looking at, again, the assessed value. The market value means nothing, 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 nothing. It does not come into play in any way, shape, or form. So we have to begin with the assessed value. 1 acre of average agricultural land in Jefferson County was assessed at $1,470. That's the same land that maybe you could just sell for $10,000 or $8,000 or $15,000. In Grundy County, $25,000 an acre. But they're not paying taxes on $25,000 an acre in Grundy County. In fact, you can see right here, they're paying taxes on $2,300 an acre. But even that's not right, because there is also rollback on the ag land. So that Jefferson County acre, that's $1,470, and that's the average across the whole county. Some of the county is not in your district, most of it is, but not all of it. So this doesn't mean that that $1,470 is every single person, it's not. You may own the most prime land that sits up on a hill, sun shining on it, water just rolls off of it, perfect growing ground. It's assessed at more. And then you have the piece of crap that's down at the lowland, it's constantly flooding, never can grow a damn thing on it. It's assessed at lower than this. This is the average, $1,470. So that is paying taxes, that ag owner is paying tax on 71.837% of that assessed value. So that's $1,056 for 1 acre. And because we're talking about $1,000 increments, just like we were in residential and commercial, that 1,056, that's 1.056. 1,000, 1 increments of 1,000, and 0.056 increment of 1,000. So 1.056 times this $2.70, that would be about $2.85 per acre per year. If the school or the county, not the city, because the farmland's not going to be in the city limits generally, but if the city or the county, or the school or the county or the community college was going to raise a tax by $2.70, it would be about $2.85 per acre. Then you go down to these bottom tables at the very bottom. The biggest one in the top left-hand corner of the bottom, and I spelled Jefferson wrong there, I see. Don't ask me where I went to high school. But you can see there's just some examples of different acres. If you own 40 acres, 80, 160, up to 2,000. Yeah, I know some people in this district own 3 acres, 7 acres. Yes, I know there are people that own 3,000 and 5,000 acres. This is meant to capture the broadest, most general, what is most people. And I just highlighted, again, just an average, I just picked a number. If you own 320 acres of average Jefferson County farmland, and the school district or the county or the community college was going to raise your taxes by $2.70, that would cost you about $912 per year, more than what you had been paying with all the other property tax you were paying. That's 320 acres. Then if you go to the very, very bottom, the skinny bar that goes across the bottom of the page, this is showing you the wrong way to do it. Not because everybody's doing it wrong, but because there are some people that do it wrong. And you need to make sure that if you're talking about property taxes, whether you're trying to explain it to your community or whether you're just trying to understand it yourself, you guys are elected officials. You have the power to change people's property taxes. You better know how it affects people. This is telling you. If you yourself made this mistake, or just any other ag land owner made this mistake, and they tried to use the market value in the calculation, and this is showing the average market value of an acre of $7,045 in Jefferson County, I personally don't believe that. I think that's an outdated number, but that's what Iowa State University Ag Extension says. I do believe it's a couple years old, but still the bigger picture point is still accurate here. If you use that number, the market value, you divided that number by 1,000, because I keep saying we're talking about $1,000 increments. So you divided that by 1,000 and you got 7.05. You multiplied that times $2.70. That would be $19.02 per acre. And if you own 320 acres, that would be an increase of $6,087 per year if the school increased the tax levy by $2.70. And while that makes total sense to me, and I think most people would look at that and say, yeah, that seems like how it works, right? It's not. Because we don't use the market value, there is rollback as well. So the real number is $912. It's not 6,000, it's 900. Is $900 still a tax increase? Absolutely. Is $900 a lot of money to some people? Absolutely. I'm not saying it is or isn't, but $900 is way different than $6,000, because $6,000 is wrong. Now you can also say, some of you, I know you're an ag owner, right? Some of you are also ag owners. I'm sure some of you guys are ag owners. You could also say, well, yeah, but still, even if it's $900, that person that owns the $100,000 house, they're only paying $112. So I'm still paying more. That is totally true. But guess what else is true? Your 320 acres are worth $3.2 million. This person has $100,000 of an asset. You have $3 million of an asset. It's the same money coming out of your pocket. And if you look at the two little boxes to the right, and this is not to pick on ag people, my family farmed in this county for 100 years. I know what it is to be. I don't personally know. I was not an ag person myself, but my dad was, my grandpa, my great-grandpa. They all farmed around Packwood, around Fairfield, all the way over to Danville. So I am not picking on ag people. I can make the same argument, just not to the same degree, for people misunderstanding the residential and the commercial formula. But if you look here, and this, of course, most people do not own $1 million in residential property. This is just to prove a point. That top box is saying, if you owned $1 million, this is market value, assessed, not the assessed value of ag land, because the assessed value of ag land has nothing to do with the market value, but you owned $1 million of residential property, and your school district raised your tax by $2.70, you would be paying about $1,238 a year more. If you owned $1 million in commercial property, you would be paying about $2,200 more. Almost twice what that residential owner is paying. If you own $1 million in agricultural land, you'd be paying $400 more, $405. That is a huge difference between $400, $1,200, and $2,200. But those three people, they each own $1 million of stuff. It's the same $1 million they could give to their kids. They could sell and take a trip to Tahiti. They could sell and go buy all the beer they wanted to buy. It's the same $1 million asset. Some of it's residential, some of it's commercial, some of it's ag land. But a very different amount in what they're paying. The bottom one right below that is the same thing, but it's kind of flipped. It's the other way looking at it. If you were going to pay $500 extra because of the $2.70 levy, what would you have to own? Well, you'd have to own $411,000 of residential property, or you could own $279,000 of commercial property, or you could own $1.2 million of agricultural land. Same $500. It's the same $500 that you could have bought a plane ticket and gone on vacation with. But it's very different based off of the property that you own. And you can see very clearly, I think, that commercial people are paying the burden of the tax, pro rata by the percentage of asset value that they own. Now, we can talk about that more in a second if you want to ask questions, but I want to throw a couple of other numbers that are not on here because this has become a big discussion in the last week and a half or so with the legislature. So this is kind of off the topic of Fairfield School District. But I want to help you understand as board members, because you are elected officials. Yes, we all only have so much say when we go to talk to our governor, we talk to our legislators, but believe me, you have more power than I do. You have more power than these guys do. You shouldn't, but you do, because you are an elected official. But this is also directed at all of you. Don't just go home tonight and put your head down and sleep. You need to be active. You need to talk to your legislator. You need to talk to the governor. The AEA, Area Education Association. So if you don't know what that is, I'm not going to go into all of it, but it's critical for the functioning of our public schools, regardless of what somebody in Des Moines tells you. It is critical. I just had a meeting there today with about 40 school districts from central Iowa. We were using that space jointly because no school has that kind of space really for that. That's just one tiny little thing that we could do, is go there and use a meeting facility. The AEA, the School Board Association, so I'm not making this number up, although they are sort of making it up, but they're guessing. They did a calculation. Approximately 50 cents of your total tax levy for the school district is going to the AEA. So if your school's levying $10, they could levy $9.50 if the AEA wasn't there, right? The 50 cents is what's funding the AEA. If you put 50 cents into this worksheet, because it doesn't matter what the reason is, it's the same thing. If you put 50 cents into that worksheet, you would see that somebody that owns a $150,000 house anywhere in the state of Iowa, doesn't matter if it's a $150,000 value, that's costing that person about $33 a year. Somebody that owns a $150,000 commercial building, it's about $35 a year. The difference there is homestead credit. Commercial doesn't get homestead credit, the residential does, so there's a $2 difference, big deal. If you own 320 acres of agricultural land, it would be costing you about $169 a year. So if the AEA went away, or if it was cut in half or whatever, sure, you could save $33 a year if you're that residential homeowner. But guess what? First of all, it's essential. The AEA is absolutely necessary. It's doing things that the schools cannot do on their own, or at least they cannot do them inexpensively. It would cost way more money that you'd be paying. But let's just say that it went away. You got your $33 savings, yahoo. Do you know what most of you are paying for your township cemetery? And I don't know if it's true in this county, because not every county has township cemeteries, but some of them do. Many, many places in Iowa, property owners are paying more for their township cemetery lawn mowing, and that's important. I'm a genealogy freak. Literally, I've been to every goddamn cemetery in Jefferson County. I guarantee it, and I can tell you how to get there. So I get it. It's important. But many places in this state are paying more for the mowing of the lawn at the township cemetery than what this AEA is costing. What the governor, I don't care about your political persuasion, obviously you know mine, but it doesn't matter. What the governor and the legislature wants is to be able to check a box that says we eliminated a property tax. You eliminated a $33 tax, celebrate. They don't care what it's eliminating. They just want to be able to say we eliminated a property tax. They did it last year with the PPEL levy. That's a public education and recreation levy. Very, very few schools had it. It was voter approved. So the people in all the communities that did have it voted said, yes, tax me more. We want this. That levy is so minute, when you factor it out to one house or one farm or one business, it's such a small amount, it's not saving anybody enough to even go buy a hamburger. But the legislature got to say, we eliminated a property tax. And that sounds really good when you're in Washington, because the people in Washington, they don't know what that really meant, but it sounds good that they eliminated a property tax. That's all they want out of it. I guarantee you that's what they're looking for, is to eliminate or reduce a property tax. Another topic, similar discussion. The governor and the legislature wants to eliminate income taxes. Me, I love it. I would save a ton of money if I didn't have to pay income taxes. I actually pay income taxes. A lot of people don't pay income taxes. they don't earn enough money to pay, or they have so many tax write-offs that they can get their tax levy. Maybe somebody named Donald that you know makes billions of dollars but pays no income tax. Legally, he has a lot of tax write-offs, right? It's totally legal. Some of you can do the same thing. I don't. I pay the goddamn income taxes. I promise you, I can show you my tax return. They want to reduce the income tax to zero. Do you know what's going to happen? This district levies income surtax for your instructional support levy. And almost every school district in the state does. Some districts levy income surtax for the voted PPEL as well. If income taxes go to zero, the income surtax is calculated off of the amount of state income taxes you pay. Well, if you're paying zero income taxes, you're paying zero income surtax. If the income surtax goes to zero, what's going to happen? Can anybody answer the question? Property tax must go up. It's just a mathematical reality. Nobody chooses it, nobody wants it, it just has to happen. Because if the school is levying income surtax in the amount of $100,000 or whatever, that $100,000 goes away, they still have the need for the $100,000, so it has to fall back on property taxes. So income tax goes to zero, your property taxes are going to go up. It's going to happen. Unless the legislature completely overhauls the entire tax structure, which, hey, I'm open to that if they could do that, but that's not going to happen in the near future. So don't believe everything you hear. Don't believe what sounds like a great deal until you have gone and done the math yourself for your own situation. Because what might actually be true and great deal for me may suck for you because of the differences in our income, the difference in our property value, blah, blah, blah. So do your research. So the AEA, I wanted to point that out. The voted PPEL, similarly, if the school board puts a question before the community to change the voted PPEL from 67 cents, which is what you pay now, to $1.34, so it'd be an increase of 67 cents, that would cost you, if you own a $150,000 home, $43. If you own a $150,000 business, it would cost you $46. If you own 320 acres of ag land, it would cost you $226 a year. So again, I'm not saying that those are meaningless numbers. $43 is a lot of money to some people. To my dad, he thinks it's a lot of money. If he thinks it's a lot of money, it's a lot of money to him. So I'm not saying that it's nothing, but in the bigger scheme of things, they are reasonably minor amounts. So just know that that's not in this worksheet because this was designed for $270, but you could put the 50 cents that the AEA cost, you could put the 67 cents, whatever. The school district might need to levy more cash reserve. That's a levy too. Put the number in there, figure out what it costs. There's no reason to sit around at your uncle's house drinking beer and talking about this stuff if you don't know what you're talking about. Because everybody's going to have a different thing, everybody's going to say a different number, and none of it's going to be right. You don't need to do this. Take this home with you for you guys, put it in your board packet, bring it with you to every single school board for your entire life of a school board member. Again, it's going to change from year to year, but it's still going to be reasonably accurate. When you talk about raising taxes in this community by 2 cents, put 2 cents in there, see what it means. If you think you can cut the tax by 10 cents, and maybe that's going to make everybody happy, lower the tax. Put 10 cents in there and see how much you're giving back to the people. That 10 cents, I guarantee you, and I'm not a fan of high taxes, I pay too much. I actually paid bond tax in 2 school districts at the same time. It doesn't even seem like it could be possible. You know, representation without, or taxation without representation. I paid taxes to Urbandale School District and to Dallas Center Grimes School District. Because of a land swap that happened years ago, there's a little teeny piece, which happens to be where I live, of about 200 houses that's paying both bonds. So I get it. I don't want you to be taxed more. I don't want me to be taxed more. But I want you to understand that what you are taxed for, what it really means to you. Going back to the 10 cents, again, it's hypothetical, but I know a lot of times in budget season, the school board is sitting at this table, sometimes for hours and hours and hours, arguing, we need to lower 10 cents. That's going to make everybody happy. no, we don't need to lower it 10 cents. We can't come to a conclusion. Put the damn 10 cents in this worksheet, and you're going to find out that it's nothing in real dollars. But when you put the 10 cents across the whole school district, that might be a whole school bus that you couldn't have bought. But now you keep levying the full PPEL instead of reducing it. You can have a more modern, safe school bus, and it costs more or less people nothing when you factor it out to each house, to each farm, to each commercial property. Now again, I'm making that up. I'm not saying 10 cents is the number, but I'm just saying let's be reasonable. You have the number, you have the worksheet, use the worksheet instead of gossiping or listening to what your grandpa says or what your neighbor says. They may or may not know what they're talking about. This is not lying. And if you don't follow this as a citizen or as a school board member, call me. I will literally walk through your county assessor's website with you. I will show you where these numbers come from. I will show you your exact property. It's public information. I could look anytime I want and find out what you own. I can look at it and we can run through these numbers, and it's going to match literally within a couple dollars, because I won't know about the family farm credit and your military credit and all that. It's going to match to a couple dollars of what your tax bill actually is. So that's how I know, after doing this for 25 years, that this is correct. Because I know that people in communities all over the state, but specifically in this community, there have been some people that doubted that this was accurate. They have said at meetings when I wasn't present that what I was presenting was inaccurate or that I was literally lying to you. I don't need to lie to you. It's right on the county's website. You can find this information. You can do the math with a pencil and paper. This is accurate. So that's a lot of stuff there.
It looks like on page 33, the increased PPEL is calculated out.
Is it on there? Did I
I think it was in the packet, if I'm reading it right. That's my question. Is that the right one?
No, 33, unless you have an.
I think you might be up.
Oh, you know what? You do have it, but it's not in this big packet. Yeah, that's right. For some reason, it's not in this packet, and it's not in my printed packet that I brought either.
Gotcha.
So you do have it in yours. The printed copy that's here at the table, that is the 33-cent, or excuse me, the 67-cent calculation. So it's in there. You can share that with other people. So the only other thing that I would want to talk about, and you can tell me how much in depth you want to go, is that the district is contemplating, this has all been hypothetical. This has all been maximum stuff. This is just how it works mechanically, blah, 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 right? But the school board is actually contemplating a real project. Not that it's going to happen. You haven't made that decision. But it is possible, and it could be a project that is approximately $40 million. So there are some scenarios in here. These are the same scenarios that we talked about a couple months ago when I was here, so nothing really changed. I think it did change a little bit because I updated your property value, so it tweaked some of the numbers, but it's still pretty much the same big picture. Do you want to go, again, into detail for that, just to reiterate it to yourselves, to help the folks that are here understand that? That would begin on page 35.
I think our page numbers are what you're looking at and what we.
Yeah, you're
had
probably
for the
then on
first
page
print.
36 is my guess. It is correct what's on the screen. So there's two scenarios in here. They're both $40 million projects, but one of them is using the biggest general obligation bond at $2.70. So we're not going to the $4.05, but it's using the $2.70 bond, and then it's filling in what that won't fund with sales tax. And then the other scenario is borrowing as much as you can from sales tax, and then you borrow less from the voted bond. So you impact people's property taxes less, which is, of course, generally a good thing. Maybe that helps people vote yes for a bond. The downside to that scenario, and maybe it's not a downside, but the possible downside is that you've committed so much sales tax because it's a much bigger bond that you're paying. There's not as much left over for the leaking roofs, things I talked about at Boone and Marshalltown, the carpet, the tuck pointing, the school buses, all of that stuff. Now, no matter what, when any school borrows from sales tax, even when you say, let's borrow the most we can, you're never borrowing 100% of the cash flow. We're never going to let you do that. And the lawyer's never going to let you do that. The lender is not going to let you do that. No one's taking that risk. Let's say you did that. So you get $1 million a year in sales tax, and you borrowed so much that you have $1 million a year in principal and interest payment. And then you lose 10 students. You lose 10 students, each one of those kids is worth about roughly $1,300 in sales tax. Well, you lose the money, you had $1 million payment, you had $1 million inflow, but now the $1 million inflow just dropped. You can't make the debt payment. You will default. So no one is going to let you do that. So there's always some money left over. That money left over, again, is used for buses, for technology, for maintenance. The question is just, is it enough? And we will go through, which we have already done, but we would go through the scenarios and say, okay, if the school borrows this much money from sales tax, and they typically buy this many buses a year or every other year, they spend this much money on maintenance and this much money on laptops and technology, can they fund all of those things and still have a positive cash flow? The answer is yes to both of these scenarios, by the way, but you want to go through that math to make sure. We don't want you to borrow $30 million in sales tax and then find out, oh, you can't buy buses for 30 years because the school district has to have school buses. So we do make that calculation to make sure that you're not overextending yourself from the point of view, at least, of funding the other needs that you have. So do you want to go through the details of those two scenarios, which I'm happy to do? Yep. So again, for this page, which is my page 36, my guess is my page 35, I think it's probably your page 36.
Yep.
So this is the biggest $2.70 general obligation bond, and then filling in the difference with sales tax. So you can see the gist of everything is kind of written out here on this page. The total scope is $40 million. That's the same with both scenarios. The general obligation bonds go to $2.70. It requires one ballot, 60% approval. That election would have to be held this November or not until next November. Could only be held in November. The bond amount would be about $34.6 million. That's what the $2.70 would support. So that's the number that might be on the ballot. Now, even if I say 34.6, that doesn't mean you could not put 35 or 36 on the ballot. And you probably want to do that because if my calculations are incorrect, I am not accurate all the time. I don't know where interest rates are going to be. I don't know where property values are going to be next year or the year after when you actually borrow the money. So if everything is more favorable, lower interest rates, higher property values, maybe you can fit more than $34.6 million within the same $2.70 tax levy. So you might put a bigger number, but the point here, around $35 million, the general obligation bond. And since that bond is taking up the bulk of it, then you see that there would be a sales tax bond that would fill in the difference. And what we've done here, you can see in that little bit bigger bullet point, I think it's the fourth one down, it says that in this section, I just randomly assumed that you would need $500,000 a year for the purpose of abating some of the levy. Now, your board may or may not ever do that. That's what I said was happening at Marshalltown and Boone. So in other words, the tax levy, the gross tax levy is $2.70. That's what people have to be willing to pay. But you decide to use $500,000 to abate it, buy it down. And in that situation, you might buy that tax levy down to $2.20. Now, why would you do that? Well, you would do it because maybe enough people in the community would vote no to a $2.70 tax increase, but they'd vote yes to a $2.20 tax increase or whatever. Again, it's just an example. I pulled $500,000 just out of thin air. The board, most boards don't do it at all. You could be Boone and Marshalltown and do it so much that the tax levy goes away, or you could do some other amount. And you don't have to do anything in any given year. A board can use the sales tax one year and not the next year. You can abate it, just whatever you need to do to try to help kind of massage your overall tax levy to be wherever you want it to be.
So Matt, I have a question.
Yep.
What is the interest rate you're using here in this scenario?
Yep. If you go to 2 pages beyond that, so that's my page 37, that's up on the screen, your page 38. You can see here, this would be borrowing money over 2 years because the construction would take 2 to 3 years. The bond, by the way, would not look like what you see here. You would not have this weird giant amount 21 years in the future on the right. This is just to do the math for me. You would in reality probably do like 20 million one year and 25 million whatever the next year. So it would look more evened out. But to answer your question, you can see there I'm assuming 4.4% average. Today, If these bonds were being issued today, it would be about 3.5%. So I'm intentionally using a higher rate to be conservative. That's why I said, if you put a bigger number on the ballot, you might be able to attain that bigger number because maybe interest rates will stay at 3.5%. I personally think they're going to go lower than that, but I don't know that. If we were 2.5 years ago, that rate was 1.87%, but we don't live in that world anymore.
Could you also explain the importance of maintaining our credit rating?
Yes.
To get that, because we're going through a budget process.
Yes.
To get that 3.5% rate, we need a quality credit rating.
That is correct. So in this process, and the same would be true for sales tax bonds as well, but it's more important with general obligation bonds because those are based off truly the budget of the school. Sales tax is really based off of a statewide pool of money, so the rating agencies look at it as a statewide thing. So every school in the state can get a very high rating, but general obligation bonds is not quite the same. So you want to have a good bond rating when you go to sell these bonds. That costs money. You're going to pay. There's fees, all kinds of fees associated with all this stuff. One of those is a fee you'd pay to Standard & Poor's or Moody's to get a bond rating. The district did have a bond rating when you issued bonds before, but it expires. It's only good for those bonds. That fee for this size bond is roughly probably $30,000. It comes out of the bond proceeds. But that rating itself is just like a credit rating that you and I have. If we go to Dave's bank and we say, hey, will you please loan us some money? Well, sure, he might loan us money, but my credit rating's 400, his credit rating's 800. Dave will loan us both money, but he's going to charge me 10% and he's only going to charge him 3% because he's really not much of a risk. He knows how to handle his money, very reliable. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and I'm spending money left and right and my credit sucks. The same thing for a school district or a city or a county. They're going to come in, they're going to look at least 3 years of your audit. They're going to interview your superintendent, whoever that might be at the time, your business official. Anybody can participate, but it's really those two people. But if the school board members want to listen, they can. They will talk to you all about things going on in the community. They're going to talk to you about housing developments. They're going to talk to you about businesses coming to this community, leaving the community. Are businesses adding employment? Are you losing students? Right? That's happened here to a neighboring district. That's happened. Why are you losing those students? They will ask. What's happening? Because those students are money, right? Those students are money. They will ask, they will look at property value histories to see over like a 10-year period of time, how consistent are your property valuations, tax levy rates, how many teachers have master's degrees, how many teachers have bachelor's degrees, how many school bus drivers you have, how many cooks you have. It's intense. They're looking at everything. But most importantly, they're looking at the school district's solvency ratio and your UAB, your unspent authorized budget. And weirdly true is that they don't care as much about your UAB as they do about your cash. That should not make sense because in Iowa, and I know it makes sense to most of us that are just think commonsensically, you got to have cash to pay the bills, right? Well, not really, because if they run out of cash, they can go to Dave's bank and borrow money. But you can't just go and ask for more spending authority. The spending authority is what the state gives you, and that's the most important number to them. Now, they would love to see your spending authority and your solvency ratio at 30 or 40%. But that's completely ridiculous and unexpected. No citizen is going to tolerate you having that kind of balance because you're not a bank. He's a bank, but you're not a bank. But you still do have to have a cash balance. It's not acceptable for the school board to spend their cash balance down to zero. It seems logical. Why wouldn't you? Why couldn't you? Like you get money every year from the state and property owners. You get $1 million, so spend $1 million. Yeah, that makes kind of sense, but no, because there's too many unforeseen things that will happen during any particular school year. One of the most important ones is, of course, open enrolled in and out and special education expenses that the district has to fund. You can't choose who walks through your school doors. And there's nothing wrong with any of the kids that are coming through your school doors. But the kids that come through your school doors in a wheelchair, again, there's nothing, those kids are just as important and can be just as successful as any other kid, but they require more assistance, right? They have to have somebody helping them a lot of times. Or if somebody doesn't speak English, they have to learn how to speak English. You have to provide that for them. You have no choice. Those kids that are open enrolling and going away from you to those private schools, I know I live right next to Des Moines Christian, if any of you know where that is in Des Moines. And if you go to Des Moines Christian and you're in a wheelchair, do you know what they can do? There's no law that says they don't say, get away from us. We only take the blonde, tall, blue-haired athletes, smart kids in this school. They can literally do that. You can't do that. You take anyone that comes into your school building. It's by law, you have to do it. So you can't control the special ed costs. You can't control when 30 kids all of a sudden come to your district, but it's after budget season, so you couldn't factor them into your budget. But you got to teach them. You've got to have a teacher there. So you might have to hire an extra teacher, but you had no money budgeted for that teacher. That's a reality that happens all the time. So that's a lot of talking about, which is typical for me, as you know. But to answer your question, Dave, yes, you must have a good credit rating. That credit rating, the bond rating, is going to be A+ or A. It could be A-, but probably not for Fairfield. And it could be AA-, which would be even higher, but probably not for Fairfield. Very few schools get to that AA, and almost all of them are metro districts that have significantly growing enrollment. And the districts that are down in the A- or even to the BBB, which you definitely don't want to go there, those are districts that where the school board just doesn't give a crap. They just don't pay attention. They don't care what happens. They will not levy property taxes to fund the school properly. Well, their UAB goes down, their cash goes down, and so does their bond rating. My loan is going to cost 10% from Dave. His is only going to cost 4%. You don't keep up the finances of the school district, this borrowing is not going to be 3.5%. It might be 5%. Whereas we could go to Linmar, and they may get 3.5%. They may even get 3.4% because of the credit rating of the school district. So it's very, very important. And it's perfect time to be thinking about it now because you aren't imminently issuing bonds. You can actually do something about it. Too often we have this discussion and it's too late. You've already passed a bond and you're ready to issue the bonds. Well, they're looking at the last 3 years. Well, those last 3 years might be a train wreck. But right now you're getting ready to do a budget. You can change your cash position. Yes, it might require you to levy more property taxes. And yes, that can be painful, but it may be what's needed. And I'm not saying that's what is needed here. I'm just talking globally. These are things that happen. So many school board members just don't want to levy the property taxes, and I understand it. I don't want my school district to levy more taxes against me either. But if that's what it takes for the school to function, you must do it. That's what you're here for. You're not here to protect the residential homeowner and the ag land owner and the business owner. Yes, those are very important components, and yes, you do care about them. You're here to educate the kids that are in the school district, no matter what that takes. If it takes your tax levy to go up, so be it. If it allows your tax levy to go down, because that does happen too, great, the tax levy can go down and you can still educate the kids just like you have been. If you have an unspent authorized budget, a UAB balance that is, let's say, 30%, there are actually some schools that do. What that means is that school board, or the prior school boards that created that big balance, they weren't spending the money that the state allowed them to spend on the students who were in the school last year and the year before and the year before, et cetera. So those kids that were in the school, while this massive balance was built up, they weren't getting what was supposed to be given to them. Maybe you could have had more paras, you could have had more teachers' aides, you could have had smaller class sizes, you could have had newer buses, you could have had, whatever, super white paper instead of yellowing paper, whatever. You could do whatever it takes. You could have had a better experience for them, which might have made them smarter, maybe, I don't know. It might have made them better citizens. I don't know. But that's the point. The state allows you a certain amount. Again, you shouldn't spend that amount. You need to reserve some of it, but not massive amounts of it. I'm not saying you have massive amounts, but you do have large amounts. But lots of schools today have large amounts. So you're not any different than most of the schools in the state that have those large UAB balances. Because for so many years, it was kind of drilled into your heads, save money, save money, save money, which of course, you do want to do, but not at the expense of educating the kids. So you want to keep a reasonable UAB. What's a reasonable balance? It's up to you. You're the elected official, but it's probably, now again, Standard & Poor's and Moody's would like to see it 15 to 20%. I say what's reasonable is probably 10 to 15%. Your cash balance, that's your solvency ratio. Again, they would love to see it 30 or 40% because that's all they care about. They don't care about educating kids. They just care about the bonds being paid, right? They just want to make sure you're being responsible. But you're not going to have a 30 or 40% cash balance because these people would be all over you and I'd be right on their back behind because they should be all over you in that situation. But you also can't let that balance fall to 2%. Because do you know what's going to happen in the next 5 years when the property taxes are cut? Income taxes are cut? I guarantee you there is going to be an across-the-board cut in the middle of a budget year, sometime in the next 5 years. And if you don't have a cash balance there, just like at your house, if you don't have a little kind of nest egg in case you lose your job for 3 months, what are you going to do? You're going to hope Dave will lend you some money to get through it. That's not going to happen with 330 schools around the state. And 10 years ago, no school had that balance. Every school, every fall, was borrowing from a program called ICECAP, Iowa School Cash Anticipation Program. That program doesn't exist today because schools built their cash balances up. They did the right thing. They don't need to borrow in the fall. There's maybe one or two that do, but most schools don't, and you don't need to. But that doesn't mean you need to have super high balances either. There's something in between that's reasonable.
What would you say reasonable solvency is?
Well, again, that's up to the school board and up to the community, but the School Board Association, they agreed with us. We had a discussion with them about 2 years ago now. They used to say that they thought it should be 5 to 8%. For many, many years, that's what the school board's official policy was. And we said to them, because we work with about 95% of the schools in the state, so we go to Standard & Poor's and we go to Moody's every day, we're talking to them. And we said to the School Board Association, this 5 to 8%, it doesn't cut it anymore in this day and age. The schools need to be healthier than that. They need to have higher balances. So we had this discussion with them, and now their official recommendation to you, I believe, and I don't know the exact number, so I might be misquoting this, but I think they now say 8 to 17% or 10 to 17%. It's something like that. It's on their website. So they increased it, and they said 10 to 17, but no more than 20. And if it's more than 20, you can't levy cash reserve anyway. And there are schools that still do have more than 20, and it just means they're spending that money down until they get below that 20% threshold because they changed state law a few years ago so that schools couldn't amass a 40 or 50. There was actually a school that had like an 80% solvency ratio. They had enough money saved to cover 80% of an entire year's budget. That's ridiculous.
Can we summarize the conversation that we've had specific to, I think it's been mentioned a couple times that we're navigating through a budget correction. And so as we think about the implications of the various levies, could we summarize by summarizing the direct and indirect impacts of those levies changing, like the voted PPEL, like a cash reserve levy? Some of those obviously have a more direct impact on a reduction than others would have.
Yeah, so it's my understanding, and you guys can correct me if I'm misquoting something here, but my understanding is that the school board would like to ask the community for the $1.34 PPEL. So that would be an increase in property taxes of 67 cents. They also would need to reduce the general fund. Not because the school board did anything wrong, by the way. That is not what happened. Every school in the state of Iowa got ESSER money, and they hired temporary staff. And then once the ESSER money went away, which it is going away, and mostly has gone away, they can't afford to keep those staff. That was known from day one. No surprise. But the district needs to do that. Again, that's just what's happening around the state. So they may need to increase their cash position. That might be a tax levy of, I don't know, $1.50 or so-ish. But they also have another levy, the management fund, which we talked about at the very beginning. That fund has a lot of money in it, so they don't really need to keep levying, at least not now. They may have to come back, or they will have to come back a couple years from now, who knows, 5 years, 2 years, 6 years, whatever. They'll have to levy money in there again sometime, but not next year, not probably the year after that. So that levy can drop away. The cash reserve, which is part of the general fund, will go up. If you approve it, the voted PPEL would go up. But the net effect of all of that, once all of those things have been offset against each other, is that the tax levy would go up about $2, the net impact. So that would be higher PPEL, higher cash reserve to help the fiscal health of the district, lower management fund, net around $2. So if you went back to the school district page, which you don't have to go back to, but I will, just to kind of remind everybody, you're at a $10.58 tax levy. Again, that's where Solon's at 16, Benton Schulzberg's at 15.50. So let's say you did add, let's just say you added $2.40, just because that would take it's roughly $10.60, that would take your tax levy to $13. Let's just hypothetically say that's what happened. You still would be below 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7, excuse me. You still would be below 7 of the 11 districts on here, even after the district did those changes. You'd still be significantly below these other districts in their tax levy. Not that that's important. As I said, don't look at everybody else's taxes and say, why can't we be like them? Why can't we be like them? Your situation is different in every year. Your city, your county, your school, etc. But so maybe if all of those things were to happen, and again, those are going to take actions of the board, potentially a vote of the community for the PPEL, possibly a $2 tax increase. You can put $2 in that tax worksheet and you can figure out what that might be to you. Again, it's an impact, probably not significant to most people, but to some people, certainly it is. It's not because there's been a mistake made or anything like that. It's just the normal workings of this school district and many, many others around the state that are now dealing with the loss of that free government money that was the ESSER money. Does that answer that question?
It does, and I would also just remind the board back to our conversation in December when the board targeted the reduction amount, that did have some assumptions as far as maximizing cash reserve levy. There is some wiggle room in there with the voted PPEL because that wouldn't take effect until the next fiscal year.
Next fiscal year.
But if we have more in PPEL, then that does save some general fund dollars. And if we weren't to maximize that cash levy, that would have an impact on the target reduction as well. So just trying to tie the conversations that we've had dating all the way back to early December when we looked more at the projection models and we had Larry in here, and then as we worked through kind of the target for the reduction, how all of these things are tied together and how we're trying to intentionally inform both the board and the public on every step that we're taking and what the next domino would be if we go this route versus if we go that route.
Any more questions? It's a lot of info. I thank you for all of this and on this whole packet.
Yeah, unless you guys have other questions, which is fine, I'm going to leave because I know you have some other business. But just to point out the obvious, if you have questions of your own, you guys have questions, funnel them through the superintendent or the business manager. You're welcome to call me directly or email me, but I'm not going to email or talk to you back. I'm going to send any answer through the school board. That's just the way it works, so that nobody's getting information that not everybody has. You're welcome to ask questions at any time. If you want to see the $40 million project changes to $35 million, changes to $30 million, changes to $45 million, just send me an email and say, hey, let's update that. We're going to do this, and maybe we're not going to do it for a year or 2 years. That's going to make a difference because the property values will be different, et cetera. So we can recalculate it all at any time. So don't go down the path of making any kinds of decisions if you don't feel like you know the answers to things. You're the ones that vote yes and no. You're the ones that control people's property taxes, so you better understand it. And I'm more than willing to help you understand as much as I can possibly help you understand. So thank you guys.
Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
I think we all understand it a little bit more than we did earlier today, so that's awesome.